everyone, this is Anna from Savvy Cat Realty, and today I'm here to talk to you about buying versus renting in the Portuguese market and what it may be best for you. For those of you who don't know, Savvy Cat Realty is a relocation and investment agency that helps expats settle in Portugal. We do work with both purchase and rentals, and we've been in the market for 3 years working with expats from a buying perspective only. We avoid conflict of interests as best we can, and we always represent the best interests of the buying party and try to help our clients in the best way we can. We also work with the whole market and allow our clients to have a lifestyle choice and help them find the ideal location for their ideal lifestyle. So, back to today's topic, buying versus rental. So the first thing that it's very important to understand is the market state. The market in Portugal isn't in the best state at the moment. We've been having huge inflation in the market in the past 10 years. The graph has been going up. And it reached the breaking point, so to say. And things are stabilizing now, and due also to the political situation, the market is going down a bit, which is good, to be honest. But overall, there is still very much a market crisis, especially on the renting department. In general, you are still able to observe a lot more demand than offer on the rental market, which means that the prices are very inflated and the landlords pretty much do whatever they want, or almost. So the rental market isn't the healthiest thing in Portugal, even when you're a landlord. There are some limitations that I will be going into later. So overall, when it comes to buying versus renting, the first thing that you need to understand is that generally it will cost you more monthly to rent than to buy, and it can be a very significant difference. So overall, my personal opinion, of course, this then depends on your own finances and your own passive and available income, is that generally it is better to buy than it is to rent, because you have a much better return on investment. But once again, this depends a lot on your own personal situation, how long you want to stay in this location. It's perfectly understandable if you don't want to do a long-term commitment. It depends on your disposable income and so on and so forth. It also depends a lot on the location. If you rent a 2-bedroom in Lisbon, it will probably cost you 2,000, while in Porto it will be closer to 1,500, and in a smaller, more countryside location, it will probably be closer to 1,000. So it will be very different on the depending on the location and so on. So that's something that you should consider when budgeting and when weighting your points. When it comes to buying, you do need to make a down payment. So that's one of the most relevant things when making this decision, is whether or not you have the available capital to be able to purchase a house. And generally, it is advisable to have 20 to 30% of the property price on cash on yourself in order to go forward with the purchase. In Portugal, there is a minimum requirement of 10%. So the banks will loan up to, it used to be up to 90%. Right now, 90% is very rare and only in cases of repossessions mostly. But the most common is up to 80%. But then you do have to pay all the transaction taxes on top. And there are 3 taxes that you pay when buying a property. The heaviest one is the EMT, and you have a chart to calculate. It depends on the value of the property, but for a 200,000 property, it usually is around 10,000. Then you pay the stamp tax, that is a flat rate of 0.8%, and then you pay the cost of the deed itself, that can be anywhere between 1,000 and 700 and 3,000, depending on the value of the property, the location, and so on and so forth. So all of these costs need to come out of pocket to you. And if you are making a loan, do take into consideration that in general, all Portuguese services are very slow, and that of course doesn't not exclude the banks. So the loan processes usually take 3 months. So that is something to take into consideration when buying, and usually the promise contract is made before, and a time frame of these 3-4 months is given until the final deed. But of course, this depends on negotiation from both parties. So, pros and cons of buying. The pro is, of course, the property is yours, and generally the market is increasing. So if you make a good investment, it's very unlikely that you will be losing money on it. Even with the current situation, I do believe that things will start rising again at most next year. And they are not really going down in most locations, in exception for Lisbon, because it was just too inflated. So that is just something to consider. The next pro is, of course, the fact that you generally pay a lot less on the mortgage payment that you would pay on a rent. And you do not have any limitations on the condominium or what to do with the house. Of course, condominiums here in Portugal are actually pretty decent in general. You do have some costs, depending if it's an apartment and so on. If it's a villa, you generally don't have any costs unless it's a closed gated community. So that's the biggest advantages of buying. The biggest disadvantages is, of course, the capital needed and the fact that you need to have minimum 25% of the property value on yourself in order to make this purchase. And of course, if you are buying in full, that isn't a problem, but it will of course depend on your own available capital. So generally, once again, I do think that given the availability of capital, purchasing tends to be more advantageous. But for a short-term stay, the lesser commitment of rental can definitely be also very advantageous. Just be sure that you are willing to have that extra costs that the rent is probably going to have. And you are, of course, a bit more limited because the property isn't yours, and whatever you need to do, you will probably have to ask for your landlord, and they may be less or more permissive. In general, the rental laws in Portugal are very protective of the tenants, so this is something that you don't really need to worry a lot about. One thing that is actually in con of buying is exactly that, because being a landlord in Portugal may not be that easy, and there are a lot of cons and a lot of costs to being a landlord. So you have a rental tax of, it was lowered to 25%, if I'm not mistaken. And then you also have a lot of protections on the buyer. Like right now, you are only legally allowed to ask for 2 rents in advance. However, there is no limit on the deposit. So the most common scenario in rentals is usually to ask for 2 rents in advance and then 2 to 3 rents in deposits. So the usual amount of cash in hand that you need for a rental tends to be between 3 to 6 months of the monthly rental value. So that's the regular practice here in Portugal. The deposits are, of course, to be returned, but this is one of the issues here in Portugal is that we don't really have a small claims court. So the legal system works terribly for small claims, and the processes take very long and have fairly high legal fees. So it's generally not advantageous to have court processes for small claims. And this is one of the big problems with rentals on both sides. It actually has a lot less protection on the landlord than a tenant side, but of course there are risks for both parties, and there are dishonest landlords anywhere, and it can it's not like it's a common practice. It's in Portugal. I think that a common practice would be landlords not wanting to pass a receipt because they don't want to pay taxes. You'll probably come by that a lot, even in very high values. I would say especially in very high values. This is unfortunately a very common practice. And do take into account that if you want this for a visa, you do need it to be registered and for the landlord to be paying taxes, otherwise it won't be valid as a housing certificate for a visa. So this is one of the problems you may encounter when renting, is that the landlord may be unwilling to register the contract, which is of course illegal, and it can be denounced, but it is a very common practice due to the high taxes and lack of protection on the landlord side. So I think this pretty much gives you a pretty good idea of the rental and purchase market in Portugal, and what it is, the good practices and bad practices, and the pros and cons of each side. When it comes to the legal side, when it comes to rental, the most common practice is a 1-year renewable rental. 1-year contract is actually automatically renewed for 3 years if neither party denounces it. And for terminating the contract, you need to have a 3 months warning, and you can also only denounce a contract as a tenant after a quarter of the contracted period has gone by. So this quarter period plus 3 months warning makes it 6 months for a 1-year contract. But the warning part is once again negotiable. If the landlord is willing to take a smaller warning, it is all good, but it has to be agreed on both sides. And when it comes to the landlord, you actually cannot terminate a contract unless it is on the contracted term. So if you want to terminate a contract, you have to wait for that contract to reach term and give a 3 months warning. So that's one of another thing that the landlords are a bit less protected on. And yeah, I think this is the basics. If you do have any other questions or things that you think should be mentioned, do let us know in the comments. You can reach out to us directly at contact@savvycatrealty.com if you have any questions. If you are considering moving to Portugal, we have a free workbook that you are able to download on our website, www.savvycatrealty.com, and it's once again free for all. It's available on the homepage. You just submit your email there and you get your free workbook, giving you a lot of tips on moving to Portugal and helping you process, making the process. And we publish videos every week. We also try and share useful articles. We always want to put as much information on your side as possible, as that's why I created this company. And I hope this is helpful. I hope that I hear from you, and I hope to see you all next week. Bye.